Oh, you said this was mine, right? Okay.
Good morning. January the 11th, 2017. We've made it 11 days reading in our Bible all the way through. We're in Genesis and in some really, really cool stories. And this morning as I'm reading, Abraham's passing. Isaac finds his wife, Rebecca. You know, Abraham had sent his servant out to the homeland to go find a wife for his son Isaac. And as I'm reading this morning, these stories, I had a theme this morning that I felt like God was speaking to me. You know, I have not done the research to know how far away it was. I know Abraham and Sarah traveled many, many miles to get to where they were going. In fact, they stopped and was going to settle in one part of the country, and instead Abraham and Lot, the land wasn't going to support all of the cattle and livestock that between Abraham and Lot, so Abraham let Lot choose which part he wanted, and Abraham went on even further to go where he settled. And my point with all of this is it was a long, long ways from where Abraham was dying back to the homeland. And so this servant went back and, you know, threw a fleece out to the Lord that, oh, how am I going to find her? How will I know it's the right one? Well, the first woman that comes up that draws water for me, she says, you know, I'll draw water for your camels too, I'll know. My whole point to all that is this didn't happen overnight. As my dear sweet Brooke would say, it took a minute. I love that. It took a minute. Well, it took way more than just a minute. So, you know, what was going on in the world? Abraham was dying. Abraham was the father. I mean, he was the prophet. Everybody looked to him. And now Isaac's lost his mama. Now his dad is dying. Isaac is 40 years old and he's not married. And he hears the blessing that Abraham speaks over him, and that is that he's going to have a wife. And so, you know, we have a hard time waiting 30 seconds. We say a prayer, and we think that instantly it's just supposed to happen. And if it doesn't just instantly happen in 30 seconds, then doubt sets in, and then we think, okay, well, within the hour I'll have my answer. And if it hasn't happened by noon today, then... And by golly, I prayed today and I didn't get my answer, let alone having to wait. And I just was struck by how many times through here we're reading about the promise. Isaac had the promise, and because Abraham was a prophet, it was a promise from God that he was going to have a wife. And then God even takes Isaac, and do you see how history repeats itself with Abraham? Remember, he lied to King Abimelech about that Sarah wasn't his wife. Well, then Isaac does the same thing to King Abimelech and tells him that Rebecca is not his wife. The same thing happens over and over again. That also struck me, the beginning of generational curses struck me as well. But overall, what I got out of today's reading is how we oftentimes have to, in fact, more times than not, I can't tell you, well, there's always a waiting period. Is there not always a waiting period? Even if it's a few seconds. We laid hands on Brooke the other morning right here in this chair, and she was healed. And it seemed like it happened instantaneously, but there was a delay somewhere. That's one of the shortest delays, but it's always, my whole point is, it's God's timing, and God's timing is always perfect. Isaac had to wait for that servant to go to the homeland, and then they had to wait on Rebecca's parents. And then they had to wait, that servant had to wait on Rebecca's answer about whether she would go. Then they asked him to wait 10 more days. And the servant wasn't willing to wait 10 more days. But then they had to make the long trek back, and they didn't jump on a plane. They had to make that long trip back walking, carrying provisions, and it once again, it was a minute before they got back. It didn't just happen overnight. So my sister Carrie just put on the screen preparation, order, and provision. And it took preparation. It took time, seed, time, and harvest. I'm going to wait a second for my internet to catch up. I think when we get to the powerful part, sometimes our connection is the most perfect at that point in time. I praise God for our internet connection. Seed, time, and harvest. You don't plant a seed and blink your eyes and the tree is there and the fruit is there. No. You plant the seed. You have to water it. You have to hoe it. You have to pull the weeds. You have to take care of it. You have to create the right environment for the growth. Seed, time, and harvest. Seed, time, and harvest. And that's what I got out of the... Now, I also got little snippets. I didn't underline it, but as I'm going through, things going on in our world, Kelly's going and out on the road today, going to go do some educational events today. And I sent her, I don't know, half a dozen texts this morning because she's blessed. And, when Rebecca's mother and father sent her out, they sent her out with a blessing. And then right in the smack dab middle of this, it talked about how she would be blessed. And it's so cool because here I am, I'm reading a story, I'm getting the word about time, about it's God's timing. God's timing is always perfect. And then boom, right there is a promise, a quote, right in the middle of your reading. If you're in tune to it, see, you've got to pick this up every day and say, Lord, I know there's a message in this today for me. There's a message today. We read a lot about the descendants today. In the King James Version, it would be the begets and the begots, and that's hard reading. But right smack dab in the middle of it, are these blessings that pop up at you. So that happened 3 or 4 times and it was promises of the blessing, promises that you'll. Let me just see if I can find one. Let me look real quick. Oh, here it is. It's even it's even set apart. It should have been easy for me to find. They gave her, talking about Rebecca, and this is her parents, they gave her this blessing as she parted. Our sister, may you become the mother of many millions. May your descendants be strong and conquer the cities of their enemies. Another translation, do you have a different translation there? No. Another translation said, our sister, may you be blessed abundantly. And then may your descendants be strong and conquer. I mean, man, you can apply that to your life. I mean, instantly I thought of Kelly, going off and doing what God's called her to do. I mean, the enemy has come strong against her just recently and tempted her away from the call that she knows is hers. And so now today you could view it as a struggle because today is the load the car, get the materials together, drive a long distance, check the weather, see what the weather's going to do while she's traveling, on and on and on and on. Or you could say, no, here's my promise. My sister, you'll be blessed abundantly. Your descendants, your offspring will be many. That could be very much what she's setting her hand to do, the offspring of what she's doing. she's prepared. She's toiled the soil. She's pulled the weeds. She's planted the seed first, then did all of that. Now she's watering, and then this is the promise for the harvest. And just like that, little snippets about your day-to-day life will pop out if you are in the mindset that through these readings, there's something for you. Matthew chapter 8. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross to the other side. Then one of the teachers of religious law said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." But Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens to live in, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to even lay his head." Another of his disciples said, "Lord, first let me return home and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me now. Let the spiritually dead bury their own dead." Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. So now Jesus is the leader here. It's Jesus that took these disciples onto this boat. And I'm telling you, these scriptures that I'm getting ready to talk about right now was so amazingly relevant and guided a family that I pray for on a regular basis through 2017. These were the scriptures that guided this family through one of the toughest years of their life last year. The fact that Jesus led the disciples onto this boat. Now, who were the disciples? Many of these disciples were fishermen. They had been out on these seas. They had been on these waters. You know what? These men had been through storms on the water in the boats like they had made back then. These men understood what a storm on the seas was like. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake with waves breaking into the boat. But Jesus was in the bottom of the boat sleeping. Now, they didn't have these great big iron ships that can weather these storms. They had wooden plank boats. If he was in the bottom of the boat sleeping, he was in the bottom of the boat sleeping on a board. I doubt seriously he had a pillow. I mean, we today would have trouble sleeping. If even just having it being idle, we'd have trouble sleeping in those conditions because we're used to our big comfy beds with our comforters and our pillows. But in the midst of this fierce storm, Jesus was sleeping, and the disciples went and woke him up shouting, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Now see, you need to get this. For them to get to the point that they knew they were going to die, this was one heck of a storm because they've been through storms. They understand being on the waters during storms, and they knew they were going to die. And Jesus responded, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. Now, think about Jesus asleep in the bottom of this boat. He led the disciples onto this boat. He loved those disciples. He loved them. And yet he led them. See, Jesus is God here on earth. He knew the storm was going to be there. He knew the disciples was going to be afraid. He knew the disciples would have fear unto death. And yet, as he's in this bottom of the boat and he made the decision to sleep, this is something else he didn't do. He didn't reach out and stop the storm. He didn't interfere. Nor did he reach out and take the fear away from the disciples. He didn't interfere. He slept. He slept. How many times when the storm comes do we interfere? How many times do we want to take it away, make it stop our kids from going through this, stop our kids from having to experience that, when we really ought to be sleeping? Now, sleeping represents rest, and rest represents the Sabbath. And Jesus came to give us the Sabbath, and it's not about a day. The day was the type and shadow for our life, that we can have peace in the midst of the storm. It doesn't say the storms don't come, and just in this situation, Jesus didn't stop the storm from coming. the storms come. They rage. They strike the waters and the waves break into our boat to the point where we're going to go down, we feel. And Jesus can sleep through it, and he's our picture so that we can sleep through it. Once again, we've got an internet connection thing. Would you bring me one, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They said. Even the winds and the waves obey him. And then Jesus arrived on the other side of the lake. And then this is where he comes up to the man who was demon possessed. Thank you very much. And then he comes up to the man that was demon possessed. Now, this is New Testament reading. We're not in the Old Testament. We're in Matthew. And Jesus approached the man who had demons. He had a legion of demons, and he cast them out into the pigs. So again, he is representing the authority that he, upon his death, gives to us, that we have that authority. As he is in this world, so are we. So what authority do we see here today? We see the authority that Jesus took over the wind and the waves and the storm. We see the authority that Jesus took over the demons, which represents anything that's coming against us, any stronghold, any wrong thinking in our mind that causes us to believe that we're supposed to be less than what our Father has called us to be, what our Creator has created us to be. Take the authority to change your thoughts. Don't just learn how to deal with the thoughts that's in your head. Learn how to allow God, the Holy Spirit, to completely renew your mind so your thoughts are totally different. That's the authority that we have, is to call those things that are not as though they are, is to take the authority over anything coming against us and live in perfect peace so that we sleep in the bottom of the boat. B-O-B. We bob. Bottom of the boat. Are you bobbing? I mean, we can make a little light of it, but you know how powerful that is when I look up and bless Brooke's heart. You know, she works hard to get me out on the road every day and taking care of all the little details I miss and cleans up all the messes I make. And then, you know, I walk in one day this week, I can't remember what it was, but she had her back to me and she was frantically just getting everything done. And I walk in and say, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." You know how powerful it would be just in that moment, say, "Are we bobbing?" I mean, we ought to do that for one another. Mm-hmm. Are we bobbing? Bobbing? Are we in the bottom of the boat? What does the bottom of the boat represent? Perfect peace in the midst of a deadly storm. That's what that means. Perfect peace in the midst of a deadly storm. We can have it. See, the first thing is we don't believe it. We don't believe it. Yes, God gave us emotions. He gave us the emotion of fear. He gave us the emotion of sadness. He gave us the emotion of anger, of frustration. Any emotion you can name was created by God for a purpose to protect and heal us. Yes, there is a reverential fear that rises up when the deadly storm comes, but it's a reverential fear that prompts us into action, into the authority we've been given to cast that off, to pray away that storm, to take the authority and say, "Lord, as the storm rages," it may be a storm that we're not supposed to interfere in. Jesus didn't interfere in the storm until it was the time. If it's not one of those storms that we are to even stick our finger into, our call in that is to pray until we're bobbing, until we're in the bottom of the boat. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Proverbs 3:7-8. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. See, as you read through these Proverbs, and I'm listening to one of my favorite teachers right now do a study in Proverbs, and he's talking about just through the third chapter, there's been 4 times 4 times that the Bible says that if you obey his word, you'll live a long, full, prosperous life. This says you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. Wow. So with that, I'm going to sign off on this January 11th, 2018 and tell y'all how much I love you.